Hi, welcome to another session of Product Day. We're excited to join you today to talk about helping a startup hit their most important milestone, turning concurrence technology into a product. Today, you'll be hearing from Tom Schofield, who's the Chief Product Officer at Concurrents, and I'm Anjanette Houser, Senior Digital Product Strategy Lead at Cognizant Softvision. Tom.
Thanks, Angenette. I thought I'd start just talking a little bit about myself. As Angenette said, I'm the head of product at Concurrents since April, so I've been only here about 6 months. Prior to that, I did a whole range of different things in the game industry. I thought I'd lay them out here because it may sort of beg the question of how somebody with all these different titles ended up running product. So I've worked in esports as the CEO of Smash, which was a small company that Microsoft acquired at the end of last year, as the kind of lead of operations at High Fidelity VR, and also as a COO of a game company. I include these because a lot of times in games, it's kind of a unique industry where some of the operational elements of the running a company really do directly affect product. When I was COO at High Fidelity, I was responsible for building out the marketplace we were building for digital goods. High Fidelity had this idea of selling all digital items between players and from a store. And it's at High Fidelity, at Three Rings, I was a COO, which basically meant I was running a couple of live MMOs. So the roles between product and kind of the operations of the company sort of pretty much overlap. And that's kind of how I found myself with a school job running product at Concurrents. So Concurrents is a technology company working in the game industry. So we're not making games. Concurrents is a kind of an application that we want to game developers and engine builders to use. What we're talking about today is how we're taking the technology that we've built, which is kind of cool, and I'll explain it to you a little bit, and kind of getting ready for it to launch it into the marketplace. And so some of the experience of how the game industry works kind of really plays into that. And the key thing is to explain a little bit why we got Softvision involved early in our development cycle. So as I'll explain, the product has come some ways, but we're still very early. Concurrence is just going to put up our website. We've just entered the marketplace. We're just starting to talk to publishers and other folks in the industry, but it's pretty early. So I wanted to start with an explanation of kind of where we think we are by drawing some analogies, some other kind of key players in kind of the game industry, some of which are technology providers as well. The first one is Discord. So everyone knows Discord. It's the kind of the default technology people use to chat within games. You may not know the history of Discord, which has unseated two kind of key, very entrenched players prior to becoming kind of the de facto standard, Ventrilo and TeamSpeak. The key thing about Discord is they just chased down exactly what players needed. They just understood what was needed to chat while you're playing a game, to connect to the games that people were playing, and they kind of built the best solution. Twitch, another obvious kind of mainstay of the game industry. You may not know, they started out as just in TV. They kind of found a technology which was streaming. They started out live casting. I think one of the founders' lives was 24-hour cast to everyone who was listening. They evolved from that to broadcasting Korean soap operas, doing dating, talking about animals, inviting other people to live cast. And only in 2011, I think about 4 or 5 years after they started, turned into Twitch, when they kind of found product market fit. The last one, which is one of favorite of mine, is the game Doom. This is kind of from a long time ago and probably dates me a little bit in the game industry. But Doom came along after Wolfenstein 3D and a couple of other games with a very clear vision of what they wanted to achieve. They wanted to enable networking in first-person shooter games. Now, that didn't exist before, and we kind of think of it as a de facto category in games, but it really wasn't before. It went on to sort of disrupt office networks and people's LANs across the country when it first came out, but it was basically the product of a couple of guys really realizing a vision and putting it into action, building it. And Concurrence kind of falls into that category. It's a technology that the technological founders had a vision for, that they built, but it needed to, so the vision was set and they needed to find a way to bring it to market. So what does concurrence technology do, right? So when we think about the game industry and you kind of imagine using Steam or the Epic Games Store, you typically imagine finding a game you want to play, kind of deciding to buy it, or maybe getting a preview of it. Some of the free-to-play games you can do that with, and then kind of setting out to download, right? So with typical download speeds in the US, if you want to play a 20 gigabyte game, you have to wait about an hour before you can play it. And that's just kind of the standard. And in fact, it's the basis for Valve's Steam platform. That's kind of how it works, right? It makes it very convenient to do that. What Concurrence has done is worked out a way to take that same install and say, okay, well, we'd like to let you play the game in a couple of seconds. So how can we set the technology up, the same game, all the same sort of assets and so on, the same kind of process of starting an install, but you can kind of play that game super quickly. And there's a whole bunch of technology. We can talk about how that happens, but this is that vision piece, right? Like obviously people would prefer to play a game very quickly, get a sense of what it's like before they, to commit to it. And that's going to presumably encourage more people to try games out. So this is a quick demo. Before I run it, I just want to explain what it's doing. This is actually in a browser. And we are going to, I'm cheating, this is kind of a recording of it. We're going to download the elements required to run the concurrence technology. And then we're going to boot into a large, heavy asseted game and kind of see it play for a little bit. And then we're going to jump to another game and start booting that game up as well. So let me run this for you. And so what it's going to do is the recording is just capturing the process of going and installing all of the pieces that we need for the game. And that's the client that we may use for other games as well. So it's just kind of like fresh from someone arriving at this website. Slice you can see is a brand we're exploring using. And then getting ready. Oh, and here we are. We've booted into a 3D game environment. And now that we've set that technology up, we can now jump to another game. And this is now starting up the process of playing a different game. So the idea there you can see is once we get people with having installed our technology, we can allow them to jump between different game experiences pretty quickly. That's pretty cool. So what are we doing to do that, right? So there's a lot of technology gone into achieving that goal, much like Doom. Lots of stuff had to be built under the hood. The first part is that we've worked out how to break all of the assets up in a game, which if you understand game development, can include some very heavy payloads, such as the landscape or the skybox for the game, which can be large single assets. We've broken them apart into sub-assets so we can just load the assets around a player. Secondly, we can kind of predict where someone is going to be in the game. And so we can just focus on loading the assets tied to where that player is currently. Thirdly, because we kind of know their velocity and how they're moving in the space, we can kind of make judgment calls based on kind of understanding human vision on how much detail each asset needs to have. So we're basically saying if you're running down a corridor, we're not going to load the heaviest or most complete version of an asset because you're not going to see it because you're moving very quickly. So we're going to take all of these capabilities we've built and inject the content you need in a scene in the game just in time into the game client. So as you start the game, you're just receiving the assets that you need to see. So another quick view of that is if you imagine a Fortnite or another game that you might be playing in 3D, you can imagine that little red dot, that dude there is you. And the green area is a prediction of where you're going to go. Now, with this game, it's pretty easy to say because you're in an alleyway, but we're using the green dot and the textures and all of the assets we need to deliver to the user. We're using that green space to sort of track what that is. So it's predictively going ahead and saying, oh, the player could move to these spots. I'm going to prefetch just those elements of the game that the player needs to use in order to play properly. And because we're prefetching and milliseconds ahead of use, there's none of the things you might worry about when if you were streaming, say with Stadia, where you might get stuttering or glitches because we're actually delivering the asset to the client ahead of the user's need. So I can run this a little bit forward for you guys, and you can see that as I move forward, that green spot moves ahead of you. I'm predicting where you're going to go, and I'm loading all the assets progressively that you need in order to exist in the game. So by the time you get to that end space, you're going like, oh, okay, cool. I can see everything around me if I turn left or right or look ahead, because they've all been preloaded and into the client I'm using, and all the content is available. All right, so one of the things we did internally, and this is kind of in conversations that started before I was there, but also while I've been at Concurrence, is to kind of lay the groundwork for how we want to roll forward from this technology into a product. And that kind of for us took 3 steps. The first one is just to acknowledge that some form of streaming is coming, right? So games are going to change. We'll see people getting into games more quickly. Stadia is an example of that. In mobile, there's a bunch of technologies in place to allow people to sort of pre-play games before they install them. There's lots of new cool things being done to make that easier. The second thing for us to do is to say, well, that means that channel changing is something that is coming, right? Just as you sit on Netflix and saying, well, do I want to watch Witcher, or do I want to watch, Friends reruns? You can pop between them as your interest takes you. And with games, you're going to be able to do that too. You're going to be able to jump very quickly from one very large immersive environment to another. So we take those 2 things as kind of assumptions. What does that mean for us? Well, as we see it, it means that creators and influencers, the kinds of people who today are on Twitch and on YouTube and Twitter and so on, they're going to play an outsized role in the development of the game industry. They're already doing so with Twitch. But if you kind of roll forward from today, what will we see? We'll see influencers and creators playing a role in basically taste making for which games are exciting, which digital experiences are exciting, and kind of driving audiences in that direction. Today, there's a lot of conversation about, you may have heard about something called the metaverse, which is the kind of idea of the Ready Player One universe in which we'll all kind of live digitally in the future. One of the ways that could well evolve is, rather than being one gigantic space, it will be kind of the sun of all of the digital experiences we see right now, right? Which is Twitch mixed with Fortnite and so on. But even in that case, if we imagine a digital landscape where all of the content is available to you very easily, well, one, technology like ours will still be needed to make those, to fulfill the promise of wanting to play the next kind of game. But even in that case, you can imagine creators and influencers and tastemakers really driving people's engagement, because it's going to be so easy to follow friends, or follow friends following influencers to the next kind of digital experience. So that was our realization. So we thought to ourselves, okay, we have this cool technology. It means that we can kind of play in this pool of streaming and how digital entertainment will change. But kind of a realization that from where we sat, which was we have a piece of server-side technology that we can use to stream content. Well, where do we need to get to? What kind of what's our next step? How do we, most importantly, take the step to find who our customer is? Is it influencers? Is it creators? Is it immediately going to be end users? How do we really test that, right? Because we're seeing a very rapidly changing landscape, and it's important for us to be able to kind of respond to that. So, naively, we said, okay, well, let's just pretend in this bottom bar here, you can see we have all of the games we could imagine running on the concurrence technology. We need some way to connect those games to these end users. These little handsome remote control things are my representation of users. And they're kind of connecting through the cloud to this app, because influencers and all those folks, they're online. They're not sort of like installing a game, and certainly we're not asking them to install the game. We want to create a world in which they can use concurrence technology to move quickly between different game experiences. And that means we need to have a bunch of capability kind of on the front end with web technologies, making choices about how that content is streamed, allowing people to quickly change from one kind of context to another, from one game to another. And so this is kind of where we started, right? So we had this technology, we saw this sort of evolution coming, and we kind of understood who we wanted to share this with. We didn't know what they wanted. We didn't understand exactly, we still don't exactly. understand how that ecosystem is going to evolve, but we really want to be a part of it. And kind of what we lack, right? So we didn't really have a way to get our technology to those early adopters, so we could really make sure that we did have proper product market fit. And that really came down to, we didn't have the staff. We didn't have a set of expertise to help us say, like, let's make the right decision. I draw in a humorous analogy, if you will, to the gaming industry, which is we were kind of all loaded up on the server side. We've got all our wood and our food in this kind of, you know, RTS type game, 4X type of game you may have played. We did not have any capability for the next step, which is to, you know, build our fortresses, make our village into a castle. We were kind of missing that. And of course we can hire, and everyone is, in a startup, we would grow and hire. But the issue we had was, were we going to make the right choices in the technologies we picked and the staff we picked? Because we really, our CTO is, you know, much more on the game engine side rather than on the web side. So we got together with Softvision, and the idea was like, hey, let's do a discovery. Let's work out what the right way to do this would be for the technology we had. You know, we're quite tightly bound right now to the Unreal Engine. We've built some stuff with to allow us to stream a little bit to the web as a proof of concept, but we really didn't understand how to do the context switching or what technology would kind of future-proof us for that. And so we got together with them for a 6-week session with about 2 or 3 hours each week. A lot of our team was involved, and that discovery sort of transitioned into development, which is kind of ongoing right now. When we got together with to do the design or the sort of the discovery, the key thing for us is, were we making the right technical assumptions? Are we picking a technology that we could expand on, right? Are we going to pick technology that was going to significantly constrain what we were doing? And thirdly, were there challenges ahead that we weren't able to sort of anticipate from where we were? We're very deep on the kind of the server side. We wanted to pick a technology that would help us stream out to end users, but also want to be able to do it at scale later on. And so some of the factors we were thinking about was security, entitlements, because if we're working with game publishers, they may have concerns about who can see what kind of content. So those are kind of constraints that we were working with. But some of those we understood, some of them were unclear, and some of them we were worried we weren't even aware of. And so that is kind of when I was introduced to Anjanette, who was heading up the product, I guess, discovery team on Softvision. And we did an initial kind of get together, just kind of lay the groundwork of what we wanted to do, met with 3 or 4 of the team members and kind of shook out how we would judge our success, and also what kind of expertise we felt we didn't have, and that hopefully Softvision would be able to provide. So, Anjanette, would you like to chat a little bit about your side of the experience?
Yeah, thank you. So as Tom mentioned, when we all sat down together at the table, they had a wealth of really incredible and cutting edge technology, and some challenges as well. So after that initial meeting, we put together a team, our discovery team, consisting of a technical director, a solution architect, and myself as the product manager. We all had some gaming knowledge and love. It was definitely a challenge at times for us to separate ourselves and our goals from just how cool this technology was and all the possibilities. But I think in the end, that coupled with our expertise helped us to move through the discovery in a way that hopefully worked for everybody. So we started talking through the challenges that Tom and Concurrence brought. We used a variety of human-centered design workshops. We defined KPIs and what success looked like, both short-term and long-term. We worked through defining and prioritizing the features. And all of these turned into artifacts later that we provided to help us move forward. But our team was really focused on the Concurrence tech stack to take the unknown to the known, to make it something actionable and tangible and viable. Our architects and our tech lead worked together to create architectural designs. These were developed throughout discovery based on the milestones that we had broken out to provide a clear strategy that limited the surprises that anyone would feel as we moved through this process. In addition to those architectural designs, we also provided, like I mentioned earlier, the artifacts of defined KPIs, both for launch and for the future. We provided those prioritized features, which led into a clear roadmap. So we knew what each step of the way was going to consist of. And then we provided a backlog of user stories that included the foundational tasks as well. So we had short-term solutions, but we also needed to focus on the future goals so we could make all the right choices. And we built our pod to allow us to scale that functionality as we moved through this process and started talking about all the technologies we were going to need, to Tom's point earlier, making sure that we were fitting in with the technology already created, but also understanding how to bring this to life. We identified the need for SDK integration with the website and worked closely with all the, for us, third-party teams, but all the dependent teams that were working together to make this come to life. We talked about many different kinds of technologies during these conversations, but we decided to use Electron for the desktop app. It would allow us to use web technologies, including future UI elements and other future features as well. We also settled on technologies like Node.js and utilizing CDNs, all important elements to support the business goals of concurrence. The backend team as well audited the application functionality and broke it out into scalable and actionable pieces. So our development team identified key application components to support that long-term development and began building the scaffolding around each area. So like building a building, right? You got to set up the pieces to support everything else that's going to come as you build that out. So the foundational pieces were really important for us to start creating so we could see the big picture coming together. So we made sure through this discovery process that we had open and honest communications, that we were deeply exploratory, and that we clearly documented our outcomes as well. And after wrapping our discovery in mid-summer, our team, our Softvision team, is now currently working with Concurrents to build this out and make it a reality.
So let me talk about what's coming next for us. So as a start, we still have a technology team internal to Concurrents, which is continuing to work on the server side stuff. The elements that Softvision is supporting now with a small team are essentially delivery of that game experience across the web. And we're continuing to develop that. It's a different sort of set of individuals that we did the discovery with, but we're kind of continuing to work together. And we've kind of integrated that group pretty closely with both our kind of DevOps team internally and the server team. And things look pretty good. We hope in November to be able to get to the point where we can reach out to some of that early audience, the influencers, creators online. That will be something of a journey for us, because obviously they're a hard group to connect with. But we're already beginning to do sort of business development around that, which is focused on reaching out to publishers and connecting through them to the influencers that are interested in their games. We're working with 3 kind of indie games that have their own small communities around them as a way to kind of test out some of the technological elements of what we're building. But we're hoping by November to be able to say, yes, we can engage with and share content that's engaging and interesting to influencers and kind of learn what they want from us. One theory is that we'll be able to produce content that, give them early access to games that they can use to stream. Another is that they may end up using the technology to build more creative kind of playbacks of their game. So that'll be something we'll discover as we kind of roll forward. So after November, our goal is to, by January, open that up even more and hopefully have some direct consumer engagement and kind of learn a little bit about what consumers want from this technology. Do they want to be able to jump between games as we think they do, which makes, you know, a web interface kind of makes sense as a way to kind of carousel together different game experiences you might imagine seeing, like on the equivalent of Netflix for games. Do they want to have something installed? Do they want to be able to buy the content for a whole game, or do they want to see little snippets of previews of games? Those are things we'll discover kind of in January. And then our hope is that we'll have a kind of a tier 1 AAA title. This is kind of a larger game that you might see advertised, or you know, your friends may be playing, and kind of be intimately involved with the marketing or promotion of one of those games in Q2 next year. So the pathway there will obviously involve us being successful in the first 2 steps, because we'll need to be able to demonstrate to publishers of games that this is a technology they can use to enhance the marketing plan they have in place. And again, that comes from us being able to point to evidence that the creator and influencer community that's really driving acceptance of games today have a, you know, an important use for the technology. So that's our journey. Just to recap, you know, we've gone from looking at sort of the technology we have to building a delivery mechanism over the web that we think the kind of initial audience of the technology will use, and kind of getting ready to sort of test that as we go into the new year. So it's an exciting time for us, and the discovery and development support we've had from Softvision has been really great. And I think that's it. We kind of zoomed through that presentation. I don't know if anyone has any questions. I know Angenette was going to sort of coordinate that a little bit. We'll see.
Well, I actually have a couple coming through.
Okay.
So our first one is fascinating stuff here. Was there a learning curve early on to do discovery? This seems relatively complex, but fascinating. So I wonder how a team takes on just getting up to speed on this kind of project.
I think there's 2 parts to that, right? So the first thing was we had to get our house in order for the kind of discovery we wanted to do. I think if we just kind of turned up in our sweatpants and be like, let's go, it's party time, it would have been tough. And so from me and the people working on the product side, kind of the goal was to say, well, you know, do we have a bet we want to take, right? Like, this is our money, and we should spend it. We own the risk of how we spend it, as it were. So the discovery was intended to bring to fruition a bet we wanted to take, right? Which is that we could have a kind of consumer facing application that was accessible and discoverable to people over the web, using and delivering the game content. In terms of how the discovery worked, I have previously worked in consulting and kind of understand the idea of the kind of focused engagements. I think my learning there was it took a little bit of help from Softvision to really pull in all of the staff on the concurrent side, because even though there wasn't immediate technical expertise in some of the things that we're developing, there's an awful lot of adjacent expertise. So for example, you know, we talked about we want to do, you know, deliver stuff over the web. Well, the server we have currently, it's been changing now, but where we started from, we really hadn't been thinking about like multi-tenancy and large numbers of users connecting to the server. So the folks who are, you know, building the server really needed to sort of turn their attention to those things and be aware of what the requirements were. So there was a lot of, you know, we're not a big team, but it required to sort of galvanize those other members to realize that their expertise were needed and kind of pull them into the appropriate meeting. So that was, I think, the most important learning was it wasn't just me and the people interested in product. You know, you had to sort of prise some people away from their current projects to say like, hey, this affects you too, because the vision we're building actually will have an impact on how you're solving the problems you're looking at currently.
And to that as well, getting everyone to think about not just what have you been working on and what are your current goals, maybe in your sprint or this quarter, but what does this look like a year from now? That was fun for us to ask those kind of questions and have those conversations and go back and forth. I hope it was for your team as well.
Yeah, and it was, because I think some of that changed, right? So I think that there was a there was a general assumption that, oh, we'll just spin up a bunch of virtual machines, one for each user. And then when you started actually doing the math and saying, well, how many virtual machines would that be, Dave? That it's kind of like, well, that's a lot. And so even though I think people did have a vision of what things would look like a year out, I think they were kind of, to some degree, looking through a tunnel that was described by their own expertise. And so having a context in which a lot of that different perspectives were shared was really helpful, just internal to us. That made, I think, a difference.
Excellent. Well, moving on to another question that's related to this. Did the discovery process give concurrence what you expected, from what you anticipated it to be to what it actually was, both in terms of process and outcome?
These are very specific questions. I think there's two kind of goals there, right? So for myself on the product side, I felt there was kind of like a meta success in that everyone said, yes, we are going to do this. So there was validation of the product direction that we had picked, and kind of concurrence, if you will, around that was our goal. I think that was supported by some very specific deliverables that kind of the stakeholders within concurrence were looking for, right? So we had a network diagram, we had a entity diagram, the sort of things that could be consumed by people on the team who are very much focused down in the weeds of how the system was built. And I think if we were not able to deliver those kind of concrete outputs that kind of fed the kinds of minds that focus on the kind of like very, very tactical things, it would not have had the sort of same sense of punctuation of, yes, the discovery is finished and these are our products, right? Because even now, within the milestones we're working with as in the development phase, I still, because this is an R&D product, there's things that we need to discover. There are milestones we're setting ourselves, which are just, can we do this? Are there blockers? If there's a difference between something taking 6 seconds to launch and something taking 3 seconds to launch, that may change dramatically the way we pursue things on the product side, just because we're dealing with consumers and gaming consumers, and they're truculent and irascible. So that's just kind of the reality. So I think that for me, just getting the confirmation that this was a correct and appropriate direction was very valuable. But that wasn't going to sort of motivate the whole organization unless we got some really concrete deliverables with it. So I think both of those were important. So it met my need of basically activating kind of that tactical level, and also kind of like validating the strategy, had a path forward. So yes, I think that's the answer.
Great. I'm glad to hear that. So one last question here. Let's see. You mentioned Ready Player One. Are you familiar with Ready Player Me type universal avatar concepts? And do you imagine that in the channel switching you touched on, people will be able to persist the same avatar across games?
I am familiar with Ready Player Me. I know the guys who built it. I used to work with them in High Fidelity, which is where I was before, in the VR company. Yeah, I think it's a great concept. The big picture about the metaverse is it's kind of all going to end up being about payloads, right? All of the persisting avatars or digital currency or items you can bring from one environment to the next, those are all negotiable situations, right? There will be walled garden versions, like the AOL of VR, from Facebook, and more kind of open environments. I think that there will be logical systems in place to allow people to transfer content and recognize. There's a concept of alienability, which is the idea that you can trade goods between you and another person without any interference from a third party. I think that will be a dominant sort of theme. I think NTFs are kind of sort of going in that direction. But ultimately, the reason that this all becomes complicated is just about payloads. And so the vignette from my experience at High Fidelity is it was an amazing technology to enable very large, elaborate VR environments with lots of code in them, lots of assets in them. But every time you wanted to go to the next VR environment or whatever, you have to sort of set your watch and go and make yourself a cup of tea and wait for it to load because it was going to take 5 minutes. And that was the death of, a distributed VR network. I think that if you can manage the payloads, which means all the assets and content that you need to stream to enable different environments, that's where you crack the problem. I think that different environments, unless they have a strong brand or IP, like I don't think if you're going to jump to Arkham Knights, they're going to let you bring a wacky avatar into the Batman world. So there may be constraints there. But barring that, I think people will have a palette of different characters that suit different moods and different journeys they're on with the content creators and influence and storytellers they're traveling with. And I think they will absolutely be able to pick up whichever body of clothing they want to wear when they travel to different space. Because being part of that kind of metaverse will, any game or environment or experience that wants to participate in the metaverse will have to meet that criteria. One of the criteria for being a signed and paid up member of the metaverse will be you allow for the traversal of people in and out of the space, for them to bring their own content, tell their own stories. And if you don't do that, you will be a game and you may make tons of money, but I don't think you'll be part of that kind of that metaversal experience, right? The metaverse will be basically predicated on acceptance of all those criteria. And so I think that, the exciting thing about concurrence is we're solving probably the biggest stumbling block to that kind of challenge, which is, once the payloads are easily handled, people are going to only travel to the place where they can take their crazy avatars and bring their kooky laser pop guns. And so I think it's a kind of a forcing function for environments to allow Ready Player Me and some of the other stuff to be used.
Sounds fun. That is all the questions that we have for today. Tom, thank you so much for this experience. It's been such a joy and just a pleasure to work with you through all of this. And I look forward to what Concurrence is going to continue to roll out.
Yeah, well, thank you. It's been great working with you too, Anjanette, and also say hello to the team. It was really fun working with them.
Absolutely. I will let them know. Well, thank you so much. Thank you everyone for watching, and I hope you have a great rest of your day.